on this land, and it's relevant that we're here near the Swan River, which is a key place for Aboriginal people in terms of their learning. And I haven't been able to see, but I understand you've had some performances from schools over the past couple of days, or today and yesterday, and they're always a treat, aren't they? Such fabulous young people doing wonderful things, and I always feel so encouraged and so uplifted when we see what our young people in this state can do. And I'm really pleased and interested, I guess, in your conference theme this year. Choose a seat on the education journey, and I love the little bus I saw over there that someone dutifully put together as an uncrafty person, and someone who even struggles to cook and clean. I just thought those buses were terrific and just resonant, I guess, or indicative of such a great conference theme. It really resonates with me as a parent and educator, and I was interested in the words written on that topic by you, Kylie, in your conference guide. I really thought they hit the mark. We're all the same in that we deeply care about our children and their progress at schools, in school, but we're all different in the ways that we can engage with our children on their educational journey because they are different and they have different needs and different interests. And I thought the comments were really apt. Parents being in the driver's seat, being in the director's seat, being in the front seat, great messages about parental engagement, and they're sentiments that are very clearly backed up by research. And it was really relevant to me because I had only just a few days ago been reading, as I do a lot of professional reading, and it echoed with some of the research and thinking about adolescence and education. And it's certainly an even greater area of interest as we move towards having sevens in high school. And as I was reading, there were in the States, it was a professional piece written by a principal. And so there was this school principal in the States, and he wanted to spearhead an effort to clean up the local community, and he didn't mean the rubbish. He just meant what was going on in the community. He wanted to focus on helping kids whose lives were being ruined by drug addiction, by gang violence, by homelessness, by unemployment, by teen pregnancy, but also just those kids who just weren't connecting into the community and who weren't connecting into schooling. So, just kids who just weren't really motivated to be there, I guess who are a bit apathetic as well. And I couldn't work out whether I thought it was a stroke of genius or madness. But what he decided to do is ask the local drug dealers for some insight. I'm thankful that's all he was asking them for. But it was really interesting how he wrote about it, with their fancy clothes in the States, with their Cadillacs, with the slang. I mean, you only have to watch, the equivalent of something like MTV or, kids, young people's videos these days to see the glorification of that sort of lifestyle, because they seem to be the heroes for lots of kids. And, look, you could replace that group with any group or activity that's highly attractive for young people. So the principal went and asked this local drug lord, why did we lose you to the underworld? Which I thought was an interesting word to choose. I don't think young people would call it that. But he also asked, why do we lose our kids these days into that sort of environment, given all the press that's available about lifestyles, given all of the education that our young people, why do young people, are still attracted to this sort of situation? And the answer was quite stunning, because the dealer looked him straight in the eye and said, it's easy. I can answer it really easily. It's because I'm there and a lot of parents aren't. He said it was that simple. When the kids go to school, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, by the way, just bear with me for a minute. When the kids go to school, he says, I'm there. I'm on the way, I'm at the school gate, obviously for bad reasons. When the young boy walks to the shop, I'm there to talk to him. When he feels scared and needs protection, or feels he needs protection, the gang is there. Isn't it interesting? It's a well-established fact about gang mentality and how young people are recruited into gangs. It's about a sense of belonging, a sense of acceptance, a sense of protection. It offers a structure. And I tell you what, there's a clear set of consequences if you don't comply in a gang, and they're very often employed, absolutely. There's a set of values, although in my view the values are pretty dubious, but they're pretty clear, And interestingly, there's a sense of purpose and direction for a gang or something similar, although often misguided, obviously. So he said it's easy. We are there when the parents often aren't. We are interested when we show an interest in those young kids when many other people don't. And we are much more accepting of things that are going on in those kids' lives than parents are. Now, as I say again, all for the wrong reasons. But nonetheless, if you can kind of see it, from a child's or young person's perspective. And so the principal works it out for himself because it's not rocket science. Parental engagement is not about showing up. It's not only about showing up. So obviously it is about showing up, but it's not only about showing up. It's not about mumbling about do your homework from behind the newspaper. And many of us are busy and, we all could fall into that trap. It's not even about forking out for the next school excursion or paying for tutoring, even though those things are good things. The principal goes on to say that in his view, too many parents are abdicating their power and influence to someone else or something else. It's really tough, though, to compete, isn't it, as a parent, in our children's world of attractive influences. Personally, I find it tough, so I'm sure others do too. And I think you had the Commissioner here today or yesterday, and he and I have discussed this at length. We're at one on this. But let me be very clear. In no way am I advocating that you go out and take parenting advice or parental engagement advice from the local gangs. But it's an interesting insight because they are very clear. They have a very clear recruitment strategy, a very clear engagement strategy, and they are successful even today in Australia, even today in Perth. And it doesn't have to be a formal gang. A gang can just be, a mentality, a group of people. And sadly, young people will go to great lengths, won't they, to remain part of a group, even just part of a social group that isn't a gang. And so what we want as parents and educators is together to recruit and engage and support children and young people into our world of education, your world of education. If we could apply the same kind of principles, the same kind of passion, it would be terrific. Because sadly, the fact is that the SEI, the Socioeconomic Index, is almost a perfect correlation to how well children will perform in schooling. And I think that's incredibly sad. It's almost, and let me come to it, it's almost automatic. I could rank by postcode every, what do we call them, suburb? I was going to say region. Every suburb in Perth and outer Perth and in the country, I could rank them from SEI. SEI is based on what the parents earn, what the parents' occupation is, what the parents' level of education is, and a few other factors, Aboriginality and a few other, disability and a few other things. And so there's a rank, a socioeconomic index for every district or every suburb. We could rank them from the top to the bottom, and it would almost perfectly align to the performance of the children in that school. Now, I think that's incredibly sad. But what's fantastic is that we have kids and families and schools that defy that logic. We have young people who come from the most poor and difficult circumstances outperforming children in other areas. And thank God for that, because otherwise destiny would be created by your postcode. And we in Western Australia, and I think anywhere, just cannot accept that as an outcome. And that's about equity. That's what we have to be about. And for some kids, their parents are not able to engage in the same way that we might want them to, in the same way that, say, very often middle-class parents could. Not all of them do, by the way. And neither do they in the upper, could and don't always, at any socioeconomic level. Parental engagement, in my view, increasingly isn't the province of middle and upper class families, interestingly. Used to be, but that's where there's a struggle, I think. So my first message this morning is to get on the bus, as Kylie so cleverly puts it, as a fully engaged traveller. I'm hoping in the budget that there won't be a tax on getting on the bus, but you never know. The less said about that, the better probably at the moment. But at this point, I want to acknowledge the significant role that you as individuals can play, and importantly, that WACSSO plays in helping people get on the bus. Because not everyone knows how to do that. And so I think it's a great job that you do. And in some ways, I know I'm talking to the converted, that you are already engaged. And I'll say something more about that in a moment. My second message, I guess, overall message about the education journey itself in this state is that it's an interesting one. The public system is under reform, and I'll say something about that in a minute, but to some extent it always has been, because it's now taken for granted, isn't it, that everyone has a right to an education and the state has a duty to provide it. That's what we've come to understand. But when the first short-lived school began in the Rush Church in Western Australia in 1830, the colonial administrators of the time mirrored what was going on in Britain. And the attitude of the time was that if you wanted an education, that was your concern, and the state actually had no involvement in it. It was an individual pursuit. It was something that was undertaken by the church, by charitable institutions, or by private individuals that had enough money to do so. And it was interesting that the early administrations were loath to pay teachers, thank goodness that's changed, or to supply educational facilities, and most attempts to provide schooling came from the sisters of the Catholic Church, or, as I said, wealthy individuals. And I was really interested to read that few actually took on the profession willingly, and in 1870, half the teachers employed by the government were ex-convicts. Now, when we're coming into a shortage, I gave that some thought for a moment, but I thought, no, we won't go there. Working with children would never allow it, and thank goodness for that. But this situation continued for more than half a century, and it wasn't until the Education Department was created in 1893 that the state actually took on a key role. And even then, it took 2 decades before secondary education became a focus. And in the interim, the Catholic Church and the Church of England developed very large independent colleges, which are the ones that still exist today. So they very much have been the core of secondary education in this state on a historical basis. And all that coincided with the discovery of gold and a flood of miners who scattered throughout the state. And so immediately that fledgling department was stretched and began the journey that we're still on, and that is to provide for a population that moves continually over a vast area. And it makes the achievements of public schools in this state unique, actually, around the world, because some 100 years later, from those humble beginnings, we now have 770 schools, 35,000 staff, so more staff than any other department in this state, and 250,000 students, because we've had unprecedented growth in the last 2 years. We've had flat growth forever. We've had 2 years, 1 year where we had 7,500 extra kids, 8,000 in the next year, unprecedented growth, all over a geographic area the size of Western Europe. And that makes us unique. And so we've always been on a journey, and sometimes it's a bit like, are we there yet? I remember when I was young, we went on a long road trip, which I've never since tried with my own son, for obvious reasons. But my mum had this idea that she'd start with a bowl of jelly beans. And every time there was an argument or a fight, she'd throw one out the window, which was supposed to make us settle down or something in the back. She tells the story that by the time she'd travelled about 3 hours, she just started eating them all herself. And I thought that was weird until I had a child of my own. And I would have gone for the intravenous drip. I don't know about you, but that whole thing about long-distance travel. Country people, more power to you. You do a great job. But I'd be going for the gaffer tape. But I shouldn't say that because, as you know, recently I suspended someone for taping someone's lips. So I retract all of that. I wouldn't go for the gaffer tape. See, you do this to me here, because I feel like I'm talking to parents. Well, I'm talking to parents, so you know what I mean. But look, we're in a period of reform, and I think there are probably about 4 key ones. There are other ones, but let's just focus right now, and I'm not going to go into great depth because I know other people have spoken about it. But we've got the journey to give schools greater freedom, and the Minister may have mentioned again about the IPS program, there to give greater flexibility, to give more decision-making authority, to try and empower you as the school community, to ensure that the school serves you in the best way that it can, to try and reduce the influence of the one-size-fits-all policies that we've had for a long time. And what IPS will continue to do is help schools become distinctive, to meet the needs of their local community rather than the needs as they're expressed across an entire state. And the Minister may have mentioned yesterday, but we're hoping, we've got 255 and we know there are more schools that are interested, so we're looking forward to that. We've got the journey to change structures to better meet the contemporary needs of students, and this year pre-primary became compulsory. Well done to schools, it was managed very well, and a historic moment in education history. And alongside that, as you know, the announcement that Year 7s will be part of secondary schooling in 2015. And there's certainly a lot of progress on that front, lots to go. We're building, we've got tenders out. We're also monitoring schools that originally didn't look like they would need infrastructure, but because with the influx of enrolments, there are some schools that are under pressure and we need to continue to have a look at those. So a lot of work in that area. Also with teachers, because we need more secondary teachers, we've had nearly 400 people respond to the Switch program, where we're seeking great primary teachers who might want to become a secondary teacher, or great secondary teachers that want to move into areas of greater demand like science and maths and design and technology. And we're having university programs to retrain those teachers. I don't know if you know, but teachers actually can teach primary or secondary. They're qualified to teach both. They don't actually have to undergo different training. They can move from one to the other. But we want to make sure that they're really well skilled to be able to take on that role. We have quite a number of primary teachers who have a degree akin to a secondary setting, and perhaps by way of explanation, they're kind of different beasts. If you're a secondary teacher, you normally do a degree in history or maths or something similar, and then you do a year of training to be a teacher. Your specialisation is in the depth of curriculum, in the depth of the discipline. If you're a primary teacher, you've usually done a 4-year degree, and your expertise is in literacy, learning how to learn. They're more what we'd call the pedagogical experts. So their depth is in understanding how people learn. So they come from a slightly different place. Now, some people have moved into primary, but they already have a degree in another specialisation, so they can move across quite easily. Other people are going to have, through university study, the depth of discipline provided to them in that study. And so it's been a response, a terrific response so far. We've got some people who've gone to university right now that started, I think, this week, and some who will start next week. And there's also a lot of work being done on transition, an area I know that you're vitally interested in, and I'm pretty keen to make sure we do everything we can. We know that leaving primary school is a wrench for young people. We also know it's a wrench for parents. There's a big drop-off in engagement of parents between primary and secondary. And that prospect of a bigger school environment often, or a different school environment, different children, kids getting older, we'll have some... when I go and visit a school now, if I go at 8:30 in the morning, I've got to dodge the scooters. Because you can ride a scooter at 16. That's new for schools. We need more parking bays because, the kids are not only bigger and hairier, they can drive. So, schools are becoming different places. So this does need... you're right to be interested in that. As parents, you're right to be concerned about that. You're right to ask those questions. We will be doing what we can. You need to be doing what you can because ultimately your children will listen to... Well, I was going to say your children will listen to you most, but actually that's not how it works. Have you found that? Someone else is much more the expert than you on almost every occasion. As I've discovered, I was trying to counsel Jack, who's in Year 12. You think I'd know something about Year 12? Apparently I don't. So I was trying to tell him about how the exams work and the mocks and, well, what would you know? Well, I said, well, I either know something or I'm a pretty good actor, but either way he ignored me, so there you go. But, in this transition thing, your confidence will be relayed to your child. Your lack of confidence will be relayed to your child. And same at the school. Primary school teachers who don't fill you with confidence, in my view, aren't doing the right thing. Because secondary schooling, there are kids who have trouble in transition. It doesn't matter whether the structure is primary, secondary or anything else, and we've got to worry about those kids and support those kids. For the most part, the anxieties are not the children's. They are very often the parents. And kids, move through quite well, but there are some that don't. The other journey that we're beginning on, I was going to say beginning on, but I'll qualify it, but how public schools receive funding, for what purposes, and how they use it for the betterment of student learning. And of course, the reason why I say we're starting on a journey, we're kind of not, because the Gonski, or whatever we're allowed to call it now, that debate continues, and in that sense, of course, it's not a new discussion. The government just yesterday morning, released the TEAS report, which is specifically about Western Australian schools. And the discussion will be centred here in WA on the needs of Western Australian children. And that report tells us that the current funding methods have worked pretty well over many, many, many years, but they're now creaking under the weight of change. Because as things have changed, it's had to be modified and modified again and modified again, and it's no longer as effective and efficient in delivering funding to those kids who need it the most. So let me give it to you in a nutshell. One of the problems. If you can imagine a big popular school has lots of kids in it. The funding at the moment weights more towards having lots of kids. So you get more, the more kids you get. So the big popular school, which attracts kids, has more kids, gets more funding. It can offer more interesting and different programs. So more people are attracted to it, which means it gets more funding. So can you see the cycle? It's called the cycle of advantage. The counter to that is the cycle of disadvantage. A school that's not very popular, usually not in a high SEI area, not many kids, kids go there, but extra kids don't tend to be attracted to it. It gets funding for the number of students there, so it tends to have fewer students. There tend to be smaller schools. So fewer students attracts less money. Well, because the money is per head, it gets the money for the number of kids that are there. It can't offer as many programs. So is anyone attracted to come in from the outside, from that suburb? No. So then it begins that cycle. Well, there's something inherently wrong with that. And so there are two ways that, there's lots of ways that schools get funding, but I'm just simplifying for the purpose of this discussion. It's by how many kids there are, and then by particular need, Aboriginality, SEI or wealth of the kids, literacy needs, disability needs. And at the moment, those factors, the funding that comes for that, is overrun by the factor of the number of kids you have. So essentially TEAS, and he makes other criticisms of it, it's inflexible, it's this, it's that, but there are two parts, there are two comments that he would make that I'd encourage you to have a look at. And the report is based on a lot of evidence nationally and internationally. This is the guy that does the funding reviews for most states that Gonski consulted. And the TEAS, his broad skeleton of his model is fairly close actually, very close actually, to the model of Gonski or that report. And 72% of our school leaders participated in that review, a very high response rate, given that we normally get about 30 or 40 to most, 30 or 40% to most surveys. So I would think that the funding journey, and I can't quite work out where we are on it, but perhaps next Thursday we'll all know more, being budget day. The early years, finally, it's just the fourth out of many, but reform in the early years. Here is a journey based on sound and strong evidence that intervention in the early years is critical and probably the most productive compared to any other time in the schooling experience. In fact, there's some research that says you could pretty much, on a dollar for dollar investment, if you looked at all the other interventions that happen in all other year levels, as I said, on a dollar for dollar comparison, you would have to put it in early years for the feedback or the improvements you get in students. So when you try and assist and intervene for a student not doing very well in Year 8, the efficacy of that compared to intervening in the early years is vastly outweighed. it doesn't mean you don't do it, by the way, but the early years is so important. So this journey recognises also that around each and every child there are so many other factors: health, protection, parenting, well-being, mental health. What we know in the research says, if you try and get a kid to sit down and learn and you don't have all those other things in place, the struggle is enormous. You know, when we have that's why, you know, I support, even though we're not necessarily meant to, picking kids up, feeding them, clothing them, looking sometimes after them after school. Why do we do that when it's not really our job? Because we know if the basic needs of children aren't met, how can you expect them to learn? And so schools have been, I think, magnificent in this area. And now the government, with the introduction of the first 10 child and parent centres and an additional 6 that they did through the election, is a recognition that we need to be in this 0 to 4 space, not on our own, though, you know, with other departments, everyone pulling their weight. And I reckon this is one of the most exciting journeys to be on, actually. And so what? So what of all of that reform journey? Plus, I could have named 10 others, and so could you. If we just look at some of the global metrics, what's called the global metrics about this reform. So the so what question. My people get used to me saying, well, that's all very interesting, but so what? Well, the so what is that our market share is increasing. So for the first time in 20 years, more parents are choosing public school education than they have before. And that tells me something, because I reckon parents go to great lengths to work out the best place for their children, as they should. The second so what, our position compared with other states on NAPLAN scores has improved. We used to always be second last on every measure. And now we're in the middle of the pack. We are the fastest growing state in terms of literacy and numeracy development since 2008. Mind you, we started off on a low base, so that's a granted. And it's actually not that hard to beat Northern Territory. And sometimes we only just beat them. Now, that's not a good position to be in. Because forget the test. The test is a proxy measure for progress. You know, everyone gets a bit carried away about the test. People say to me, you know, it's appalling, teachers are teaching to the test. I might have said this to you before. Well, good. And the reason why I say good is not because it's a test, but because NAPLAN test represents the basic skills. And if teachers are teaching the basic skills, well, hooray for that, because they always should have been. So I'm happy about that. So, you know, people say, oh, you're a supporter of teaching the test. Well, only because it represents what is agreed across the nation by every expert to be the essential skills. The counter to that, of course, is NAPLAN is one day in a kid's whole year and should be taken, you know, with in that measure, in that perspective. Everyone can have a bad and a good day. It's one piece of information. And so, when someone wrote to me and said they're considering taking legal action over the school because the kid didn't do well that day, well, I think they need a Bex and a lie down. And I think we all need to when we make NAPLAN the be-all and end-all. It ain't. But it's a pretty important piece of information nonetheless. Perth Mod ranked number 1, a public school for the first time for a very, 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 very long time. It's good. It's one piece of information. Good on Perth Modern. What about 769 others? Suspensions and exclusion numbers are down. Now look, these don't tell you everything. Each has its flaws, but they tell me something that we are moving in the right direction with much to do. And so really the last thing I want to say is this. The last point on this theme of journeys is this. You can't have successful reform without staff who feel valued and supported and protected from unfair expectations. There is nothing more debilitating for any of us than front up every day to a tough job, and let me tell you, teaching is, and I don't care what anyone says, unless they've been there, they just can't know. It's a tough job. There's nothing more debilitating than turning up and getting constantly criticised for meeting impossible expectations. I think it's okay, actually, to be critical when people don't meet reasonable expectations, but I'm talking about impossible expectations. And you can't have successful reform across schools without parents having a seat on the bus, in fact, a key seat. And so we're in it together. So when I was first Director General, I wrote the Classroom First strategy. It's our decision-making strategy. And I said this: our teachers will not give of their best if they feel undervalued and criticised. We will take strong action to protect our staff and build community respect for their work alongside the community. And so some of you might have read about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I wrote an opinion piece about student behaviour for the West, which I don't often do for a number of reasons. But for those who didn't, and mostly because it doesn't matter. For those who didn't, I made the argument that school staff should not be blamed for the appalling behaviour of a very small minority of our students, and that the broader community has some basic questions to ask of itself, particularly in relation to parental responsibility and some of the social norms that I think have developed in neighbourhoods. To blame the schools, or parents for that matter, for bringing bad behaviour to school misses the point. Families, neighbourhoods and society at large are all involved, and we must all be involved in the solutions. For example, when a bunch of kids before school goes down the local park, organises a fight and has a fight, and 3 of them have a school uniform on, I'm sorry, but I do not accept the criticism that the school is out of control. They posted on YouTube, and so recently, this is what happened. 3 of the kids, sorry to the sport I'm going to mention, all had a top on that came from the local football club. No one said the football club was out of control. So why is the school responsible for that behaviour? Bad behaviour gets brought into schools. Poor attitudes about using violence gets brought into schools. And we have to deal with it. So I'm prepared for us to do our share of heavy lifting on this issue. And Carl Callaghan agrees with me. And our teachers must accept, and if they're not, I'll deal with them. They must accept that they've got to have good classroom management strategies. They've got to deal with bullying when it's there, although very often, let me tell you, the bullying starts somewhere else and gets played out in the schoolyard. And we will continue to commit our time and effort and energy to work this out as part of our professional responsibility. But by turning the heat up on schools as if somehow we are failing society, I don't think that's reasonable for us to cope. And boy, was the response immediate. Some of the talkback that followed accused me of parent bashing, and I'm sorry if people took it that way. It wasn't intended that way. And never once did I mention anything in that vein. I was also accused of buck passing. Well, that's a really easy response, because where does the buck stop, and why is it always with the school? And I'm actually not into blame, and I'm very happy to take the heat in talkback when we deserve it. But I thought at the time, as a parent and as an educator, I know how hard it can be. I actually know how hard it can be, and I meet with parents all of the time who are struggling with their kids, despite the very best of what they've done, their kids having a difficult time. But I don't think your school should be unfairly targeted because of the behaviour of a few. And so that's certainly something that I've turned my attention to. I do this on behalf of teachers, but I also do this on your behalf because I see so many parents toiling away to support the school that their kids attend, to make the school that their kids attend a good school in practical ways. Moral support, financial support, leading, planning, washing, painting, and the list goes on. So the reason why I want to say this at the end is they're the rare occasions. They're the ones that get the media, unfortunately. I want to thank you for the support that you provide to the public school system. We're all on a journey together, and, this kind of day that you'll have, or these couple of days, they're good occasions to help us to stop for a bit, and you won't like this, at the Roadhouse, on the journey. That's stretching it just too far, isn't it? And getting a greasy cheese sausage. Have you done that? Catterby Roadhouse, well known for its greasy cheese sausages. But who's been there? Come on. See, you know what I'm saying? But, occasions like this help us to stop for a minute, stand back, give us time to reflect and plan for the journey ahead. And so I really, deeply want to thank you and appreciate you for the efforts that you give into our schools. And thank you for this chance. I know I've got some questions to answer, and I'm very pleased to be able to do that. But once again, thanks very much for your support.
Yep, that's a fresh one. That's all right. Okay, so we've got the microphones. We don't really need the microphones, but that's okay. We just need the PowerPoint to come up. We have had some questions on notice provided. Thank you to those affiliates who have put them forward. The first question is from plan in schools. Here we go. No, yes. Do children transfer skills into their learning? And I know you've just touched on this in your speech. So
Okay. Now you're asking the questions out of order.
Oh,
But that's okay. I can cope with that. It's all right.
Maybe a different order than what you've got them in.
We're all flexible here.
Okay,
so
thank you.
The question from Ardros: do children transfer skills into their learning? I've talked a little bit about this, but certainly NAPLAN tests literacy and numeracy that are developed over time through the school curriculum, and it tests the sorts of skills, as I said, that are essential for success in later years. And those tests are, they're pretty rigorous. On another day, at another time, you might like to try here to sit part of the Year 9 NAPLAN test. It's an interesting activity, remembering that the minimum standards are very minimum. So if you're working with children in your schools and you're delighted that they're above the minimum, don't be too excited. In terms of a minimum, you'd be wanting much more than that. But look, certainly, in answer to the question, do they transfer skills into their learning? Well, I wouldn't see NAPLAN as a test being transferred into learning. It kind of works the other way, in so much as you learn the literacy and numeracy. NAPLAN represents the essential skills, and so for one day in your student's life, they come in and it's like a dipstick, and they test whether they've got those literacy and numeracy skills. But I can assure you that they are the ones deemed essential for children to move into the next stage. They've been psychometrically supported, which means as a test, it's a very robust test of success. But it's only one piece of information, as I've said.
Thanks, Sharyn. The second question is from Kinross Primary School with regards for the difficulty parents face enrolling students in specialist programs that require crossing boundaries. And the question is it a funding or organisational issue that will be addressed?
Okay, let me just... Yep. So it's a really good question, and it's a question that we haven't really had to confront, actually, much until more recently. History. The Department of Education or schools are obliged to guarantee a place at the local school for any child in that local area. That's unequivocal. What's happened over time is if a school has had a good program and sufficient space, it has been allowed to offer, if the department agrees, a specialist program where children can come what we call a cross-boundary. Okay. Now, those programs were only ever allowed to occur where there was space in the school, the accommodation space. We don't build extra rooms for specialist programs. So school X, let's say it was built for 700, it only has 450. So we would say, okay, you've got some space there. We might agree that you run a specialist program and children can come across boundaries. So that's been able to occur until more recently. Now we have big fluctuations in enrolments. So in that school, that example that I gave, they might have had an influx of enrolments. They must take the local children first. So that's the situation. And that means that sometimes the number of places available for a specialist program have had to reduce. So the question is, it's a statement really in the first part. It's become very difficult to enrol students across boundaries. Is this a funding or organisational issue that will be addressed? It's kind of both. They were set up on the basis of schools having space and being able to take students in. The policy position of the government is that it doesn't build additional accommodation for those specialist facilities unless it's a big government initiative like Perth Mod or, say, John Curtin College of the Arts. But essentially, children coming cross boundaries. It depends on how much space there is, and if there's a lot of space, they can take more. If there's less space, because there's been more local kids, then there'll be fewer places. So it's both funding and organisational in that sense, but there is no policy to change from that position at this point.
Thank you. The third question is also from Kinross Primary School. With the rollout of national curriculum, what support will be provided to parents to understand reporting and academic expectations for students?
Yeah, this is also a really good question, and I mentioned to Kylie earlier, you might in the future like to have some discussions, and I know Kylie's having some already with Alan Blagage, because the situation in Western Australia has changed. We now have the School Curriculum and Standards Authority as a separate authority, which actually makes or has the final say in the curriculum for Western Australia. But that being said, all schools are required to have an assessment and reporting policy that they're communicating with their parents. It should outline the processes that that school is going to use. And so schools will be required to talk to parents and make sure parents understand reporting as it's changing and academic expectations. There are some changes with the curriculum, and that's why the Year 7s have changed. For example, algebra that used to be taught in Year 8 will be taught in Year 7. Historical or history and literature in their finer forms, usually for high school or secondary, are going to be taught in Year 7. So some of they're not the only changes. Some of those things parents will need to be aware of, and our expectation is that the support that will be provided, schools will be in a position to do that, and I think we've developed some tools that they'll be able to assist in giving that information out. But you can also get that through the School Curriculum and Standards Authority, who are a new body that can help you with that too.
Thank you. The fourth question is from Rostrata Primary School. How is the use of new technologies as learning tools being evaluated and disseminated? I took the liberty of adding the "of" because I thought it was meant to be in there. Okay. Thanks, Janet.
Certainly a lot of work in this area across the nation, and teachers are encouraged to use new technologies in their classroom. In my view, they never replace the teacher. They're there to supplement and complement what teachers do. But it's true to say that there has been limited research on the efficacy of technology to change student outcomes, and some of that is because you've got to look at your workforce and the capacity of the workforce to use and teach with those technologies. It's certainly true to say that many of the children are better at using technology than you and teachers. And so I know that when I have a problem with it, I get help from people in my family. And so we've got this burgeoning growth, or there's a big growth of young people who are very able, and a workforce, an ageing workforce actually, that we have to do a lot of work with in terms of the use of technology. But because of that, we, in Western Australia, we've been looking at the use of tablet technology, particularly iPads, to support literacy and numeracy in the early years, to see if we can learn a bit more about how that support can be provided. It was a small initiative, but we had early childhood teachers across 19 primary schools, and they worked at how best to use those tablets in the classroom. But we had to look at practical issues also about responsive Wi-Fi and connectivity and how best to load and update tablet software, and it's quite a large undertaking. But we commissioned 2020 global business consultants to undertake the evaluation of that initiative, and that was the first formal investigation of the use of tablet technology in any Western Australian schools formally. So the lessons learnt, and it's important that we understand that, with things like the need for teachers, obviously, to be able to use the technology themselves. Technical support's always been an issue, and it's an issue I know that's been raised by WACSSO as well. And that kind of evaluation's helping us form processes and views for the future. And so that final report will be available shortly. So that's an indication of how much work is yet to be done. There's a lot of use of technology in schools. We got extra technologies through the Commonwealth, but they gave us boxes, and boxes actually aren't the hard end. The hard end is, the maintenance, the teacher support, the technical support, the evaluation and the replacement. But it's a big issue for us, particularly in a state like ours, and I think is something that we'll have to keep working on for the future.
Thank you. And the final question is from Vass Primary School, a call for help with regards to the school's growing and surpassing capacity. When do numbers of students get to a point when the ablutions are actually increased? The school has toilet facilities for 200 students, and they're already at 560, and it talks a bit about the problems they've got with their current facilities.
So it's always nice to finish with toilets and sewerage, but they're necessary parts of life. And I think actually is when I go to schools, I always get taken to the toilet. Not because I need to go, but because toilets often, people kind of can make other things look, new and updated, but you can always tell a maintenance issue when you go into the school toilets. I'm being actually quite serious about that. And so it is a serious question, and thanks to, I think it's Danielle for that question. So by way of background, we installed 5 transportable classrooms at VAS because they have got a growing population, and we'll continue to have a look at that. We provide toilet facilities to staff in schools. We can only do it, and it's kind of done in concert with what's called the Building Code of Australia, and the concerns that have been raised, I'm told that we're going to do a comprehensive school toilet audit. I haven't heard of this before, but I'm pleased we're going to do it by some poor soul in the near future. So Danielle, to the question, it's good that you raised it. I'm not aware of the VAS toilets, but obviously our officers are, and we're going to go down and have a close look. Part of the problem, and just for everyone's benefit, where this gets complicated, because it's never simple. It's not, you haven't built the dunnies, you've just been slow or something. There's always other things. So here we go. Approval was given for VAS Primary School to be connected to the mainline sewer in November 2012. Complications with the local sewer network have meant that infrastructure has been difficult to complete the school connection. I'm sure there are other reasons that there are problems with that as well. It's expected that these works will be completed in 2013 Christmas holiday period. You see, we can't do it when the kids are there. So that kind of constrains you to 4 points in the year as well. So it's necessary to isolate the school sewer system during that upgrade, and obviously that work is on track. But to the people of VAS, I know it's been a frustration. There are some reasons why it hasn't progressed quickly, but apparently we're going to do a school toilet audit, and hopefully out of that we'll know exactly what needs to be done and we can get on and do it. But I know that there's probably 50 other schools that could put their hand up and say the state of our toilets isn't great either, and I'm well aware of that. But thanks for the question, and I don't mean to make light of it. There's obviously some work that needs to be done there in VAS.